Hello, welcome back to the next session, and I'm delighted to welcome Ami Clarke, who is an artist, writer, and educator, and founder of Banner Repeater, which is an incredible Hackney Downs station. If you haven't been there, I suggest you get there very quickly. So watch out,
very quickly.
You'll be stampeded.
I expect you tomorrow.
Yes. So thank you very much, Ami.
Pleasure. So, I've written a paper, and just because I've got an awful lot to say, so I really wanted to sort of get through things in a concise and as efficient way as possible, basically. I'd love it if we had the opportunity for questions afterwards, but I don't know if that's possible due to time. So please bear with me, I'm sort of trying to put quite a lot as well into one talk. So over the last 2 years, I've seen much of the research that I've been working on for a while now come to pass in such a way that mainstream media now writes articles that resemble some of my most indulgent essays. Whilst this is thrilling on the one hand, it's also terrifying, as I was writing about worst-case scenarios. I'm going to talk quickly about a few works and ideas that have developed over recent years with error correction and introduction to future diagrams, low animal spirits, and Ami Clarke, author of The Blank Swan, which have explored in various ways notions of agency and free will amid the new behaviours emerging from recent technological assemblages that necessarily include their very specific socio-economic and political configurations as conceptual practice and process-based works. And I'm going to further speculate on covfefe, language in a meme economy. So I'm fascinated by the interdependencies between code and language that exemplify our hyper-networked times, picking up on the long history of artists' experimental works in text and publishing over the last century, many of which we have at Banner Repeater that you should come and see, that through their production inflect as well as contain traces of the subject, emerging in synthesis with very specific technological assemblages throughout history. As publishing and broadcasting become indistinct through social media and other network connectivities, ideas of authorship, intellectual property, copyright, and the constitution of a reading public come to mind, an evolving subjectivity that emerges through market relations. It's become particularly fascinating to me over the last 10 years or so, as the ways we communicate with one another also start to blur the lines that seemingly exist between language and what we might regard as code, where saying coincides with doing. And language, of course, also has a history of a performative dimension with demonstrative social protocols. But here, I want to think about how an additional and unprecedented hyperconnectivity affects things, producing new, old behaviours, and some we haven't seen before, as language is bound tightly with notions of free will. Publishing as process was a series of lectures that I've done over the years, influenced by Catherine Hale's work that tried to address many of the concerns that we've been confronted with of late. And I'll just briefly map how I arrived at low animal spirits, as it helps gives a little context. Whilst working on the Leveson inquiry in 2013, that helped make visible to what an extraordinary extent the British press, politicians and police were all undoubtedly in each other's pockets, pouring doubt on anything approximating a free press. And we must note here, too, that the press in the UK, this is over 3/4, that's 77.8%, owned by a handful of right-wing billionaires to start with. I was reading Biffo Berardi's book on finance and poetry, and spurred on by some of the absurdities therein, took an opportunity to apply the extreme algorithmic operation of high-frequency trading to world news, which at the time seemed to epitomise neoliberal excess, trading for the sake of trading, process for the sake of process, no less. Low animal spirits took its cue from the oft-mentioned loss of the referent in both language and the economy, and displayed a high-frequency trading algorithms portfolio as it traded in World News Live, as the Twitter bot at Low Animal Spirit tweeted speculative headlines, and an associated work, Breaking News Flash Crash, showed exactly how interdependent social media and the calculus of the financial markets had become through a process of analysis and prediction of past and future behaviours. And we chose to apply it to 994 English language news feeds live because, unlike poetry, news matters precisely because of its indexical link to the truth. The financial sector was also particularly fascinating because it certainly wasn't shy at forging ahead with automation in ways that displaced even the most trusted wisdom of human operators, signalling towards new technological developments far outreaching other sectors at the time. In a 2015 analysis of the flash crash event that had similarly been the inspiration for our work Breaking News Flash Crash in 2014, Xero Kline and Kate Crawford draw attention to the data miner software that mines Twitter's fire hose and delivers what is deemed relevant into the hands of traders. Citing journalist Michelle Price in the Financial News, their research showed that a sophisticated scoring of the relationships between words in play can uncover grades of expressed emotions. Through real-time analysis of Twitter data, software packages like Data Miner assess emotion, importance and social meaning in order to predict the present and thus transform social media signals into economic information and value. And what was interesting to me here, much like the wages for housework movement noted historically, was that it didn't matter if you wanted to think of human interactions and emotional responses as quantifiable or not, it was happening anyway. While finance afforded a glimpse of a highly volatile and paradoxical model of mass behaviour, it was also clear that the figure of Homo economicus was a deeply indebted subject, as increasingly the life world became a system for the notation of market trend data within the highly quantified protocols of platform capitalism. What we hoped was also revealing about the title Low Animal Spirits was that it spoke of the paradox that John Maynard Keynes discovered during the Great Depression of an inherently herd-like mentality to the market, whilst being simultaneously reliant on the spontaneity of someone acting of their own free will, and never the more so than during periods of low animal spirits. What was needed most urgently in a downturn were the high animal spirits of the heroic individual, pitted against the mathematical determinism of the markets. Serendipitously, around early 2015, Low Animal Spirits conjoined with the script I've been editing alongside the running of Banner Repeater called Error Correction, an Introduction to Future Diagrams. I'm just going to play you a little piece here that's recently been performed at Lux on Sunday, which some of you might have also been at. Shifting from serial and optical control to modulatory control of data, a miasma of the numbers to come. Within an explosion of creative potential, ceaselessly enclosed in its modulation, value is operationalized through likes, upvotes, comments and shares, unstoppable equilibriums, multimodal analysis of mimetic media, living labour as the engine and engineer of its own enclosure, radically redefining freedom for the lulls. A Silicon Valley meets itself coming back as the dark enlightenment, beat, a continuous stream of messages embodying the radical political content of 17 dogs that understand how you feel about pizza, as individual expressions and collective aesthetics contribute to the collective construction of value, rife with exclusionary dynamics, full of tension and fear, accumulating cultural capital, data as currency, an asset in the eyes of a law possessing fecundity, fungibility and potential for novel transformations. The shape of the truth seems to be related to the technical means we use for approaching it, constantly updated and haunted by its plural, challenging the violent absolutes of empire as jouissance ripples through the networks, beat, new gradients of measure emerge at granular scales of psychoanalysis and the transposition of military style, information operations and propaganda to achieve informational dominance, beat, autonomous agents internalise their directives, a virus that will inflect the future, signifiers, concepts and fictions, material entities that have real physical effects, just as viruses exist in space and time, heat-seeking algorithms that scour for potential points of rupture for the purpose of occupying space within a rabid economy of attention, whilst the I that remains of the me that was I perpetuates in a suspended state of relative autonomy and self-invention within a dream architecture of effective capture, an honouring space in which ideas plant themselves as a virus, activated and created by very small units of sound and image. When the human nervous system
saturation reached
unscrambles the scrambled message, it will seem to the subject that my very own idea just occurred to me. So error correction acts as a script in which each articulation is just one of many takes, constantly re-edited for each articulation. It includes and references numerous openly appropriated texts that include contemporary commentary, news items, as well as anecdotal evidence, culminating in an interrelated convergence of many interwoven threads, whereby the voice, through language, is constituted between someone else's thoughts and the page. The title Error Correction speaks to the ways calculus was arrived at through the differing frameworks that have facilitated human experience of the world, from single point and perspectival drawing to projected geometry and further, beyond the human sensorium, via mathematics to calculus, leading to the development of probability theory and being able to speculate on the future, whilst introducing the very idea of doubt into mathematics. The reference to future diagrams in the title also meant that just as Euclidean geometry had been surpassed by calculus, the diagrams that we had been reliant on until now might also be insufficient for the task at hand in understanding a life world dominated by statistical analysis. One of the first articulations was recorded live on the platform at Hackney Downs, capturing my reading the script within the architecture of sound that is present in a working railway station. I was particularly interested in the complex ways that the body receives and processes sense data within this assemblage, and took a cue from the physician and physicist Hermann von Helmholtz's research into mathematics of the eye that led to probability theory, who suggested that human perceptions, so prone to error, are at best an approximation, an estimation even, that operate within the protocols of instruments. Helmholtz was notable for adopting procedures for handling variations in data from other scientific fields, and his premise was that human eyes have a hardwired involuntary drive to minimize perceptual errors, constantly having to allow for all the small errors between the many movements, staccato-like, that are made and discovered error correction in the nerve endings of our bodies. I was interested in the way the body was in question in this assemblage, acting at several different scales and temporalities. The script denied any primacy of the voice or identifiable subject, which is all the while being constituted through other people's words. Within the diagram of power that was emerging at the time, I wondered if another strategy might be necessary, oscillating somewhere between remaining visible whilst also hidden, as well as multiple, as it became clear that the protocols of platform capitalism relied entirely on a supposed freedom of expression, drawn out by highly addictive and sophisticated scripting mechanisms, as you uploaded exactly what was on your mind 24/7. What has become abundantly clear now, of course, even to mainstream media over the last few months, with the breaking of the Cambridge Analytica story, are two things. As a rule of thumb, if it's free, then you are the product. And with this, implicitly, a currency of data emerges as we see how data buys participation through the protocols of platform capitalism. We're not going to have time to talk about the full complexity of these operations here. This is another lecture. But suffice to say, as Mercedes Bunz noted in 2014, algorithms have become a social technology that is massively transforming society, economics, and the whole structural premise upon which democracy itself is built. Again, the underlying anxiety in this statement speaks of how democracy, tightly bound with notions of free will, is seemingly undermined by the interference of some kind of automation. And here the post-human critique of Catherine Hales and Rosie Bedotti and others is particularly pertinent at this point to start to unpack what underlies these anxieties as the sovereign individual loses his sense of autonomy, and to remember that historically human rights, including the right to vote, have only ever been afforded to some and not others. We might turn to more recent events involving Cambridge Analytica at this point, who aren't doing anything particularly new with regards to their attempts at election rigging by using data to determine how to target whom during campaigning. But what is significant here is the amplification of these effects to a previously unprecedented scale and the new behaviours this affords. In 2013, the Amsterdam-based design collective Metahaven asked, "Can jokes bring down governments?" Whilst in 2017, we might have asked, "Can jokes bring down democracy?" A seam of cruel jouissance that comes of hunting in packs had developed alongside the emphasis on the individual as consumer par excellence, drenched in narcissism and resentment through the mechanisms of social media, high on animal spirits. Trolling often doesn't sound all that different to the casual racism and misogyny to be found in everyday banter, as Whitney Phillips notes. It's just amplified. And as it seeps through the retreat from empiricism to the post-truth political landscape of truthiness that describes the belief in what you feel to be true rather than what the facts will support. In tandem with this, the very nature of the constantly updatable digital fact started to challenge some of those absolutes that came of empire through a new multitude of voices, as Mercedes Bunz again pointed out in 2014, the shape of the truth seems to be related to the technical means we use for approaching it. New old strategies of disinformation also took hold, an old tactic, as I've mentioned, but one now built on unprecedented access to data. Chris Wiley, the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, points towards how these strategies differ from general election campaigning, saying, Obama didn't win because of disinformation. The fundamental difference between standard political targeting and information operations is this idea of informational dominance. I inject my messaging in all the streams of information around my target so that they start to think, they start to perceive things that aren't necessarily true, but in their mind it is. And they go and behave in a particular way that I've led them to so that I can exploit their vulnerability. The premise of Cambridge Analytica is to warp people's perceptions to gain an objective. And this is particularly interesting if we think through an observation made during the presidential campaign that Trump acted much like a hungry algorithm, deliberately, insofar as intention plays out with him, searching out weak points to attack and produce rupture for the sake of it, not for any particular reason, disruption for the sake of disruption. Further speculation on this tendency suggests that this approach is also well suited to the multiple perspectives on any one issue that were deployed by arch data manipulators, Cambridge Analytica, thus making possible the granular level of targeted campaigning that is said to have contributed to bringing Trump to power. We can trace the undermining of meaning in art through the nonsense of data to the no sense of the cut-up, where nuclear dust radiates through mimetic media, to what Nick Cernicek, author of Platform Capitalism, has called unsense, whereby I would extrapolate the complete lack of meaning evident in the first place is actually quite difficult to subvert. There's little point in making nonsense of Donald Trump. He's doing very well on his own. And we can see how perhaps previous avant-garde strategies that deployed rupture as a tactic, and not without considerable animal spirits, worked only in relation to the more entrenched societal behaviours of stricter times historically, that meant the tactic of shock and awe was not an everyday occurrence. The first-person narrative, meanwhile, is co-opted into complex behaviours of addictive upload, reliant on the construction of you as the product, whilst cognitive, non-cognitive, conscious and unconscious bots, recogs and other automated voices, driven by machine learning and artificial intelligence, contribute to a cacophony of unthought written only recently by Hales in a book in 2017. And all, or any of these, might contribute to the collective construction of value in the digital age, driven by the dynamics of something not dissimilar to vernacular meme criticism, rife with exclusionary dynamics, where appraisals are explicit, conversational and complex, as individual expressions and collective aesthetics act towards collective assessments of value. They show how online communities assign value whilst boundary policing, identity constructing and accumulating cultural capital all the while, contributing further to new dimensions of disinformation that far surpasses the logic of creating error, glitches, gaps and rupture purely for the sake of it. And here I'd like to return to a work I made with the French-Lebanese financier and philosopher Eli Ayash as he attempted to try and deal with imminence of the markets, written about in his book, The Blank Swan, which is a book about pricing, writing and contingent claims, in which he suggests that writing has an equivalence to pricing in the derivatives market, writing that no conceptual tool is available to stage the possibilities open to history, and wonders if maybe a non-conceptual tool or medium can avail itself to us in order that we might do something about history. Not that we would predict it, for it is now too late, and the historic event has occurred, but maybe we could write it or trade it. His philosophical inquiry asks what technology might be available to get inside the very process of history and do something more active than to watch passively as history unfolds, altogether different from the conceptual activity consisting in predicting and outguessing history. His book, The Blank Swan, focused on the George Louis Borges story of Pierre Menard, author of The Quixote, that depicts a fictional writer and critic, Pierre Menard, who spends his time writing the 9th and 38th chapters of the first part of the 17th century Don Quixote by Miguel de Cervantes, and a fragment of chapter 22, several centuries on from when the text was published. Borges writes the chapters are the same, every word and every comma, as those written originally by Miguel de Cervantes, yet this wasn't a mechanical transcription of the original. He did not propose to copy it. As such, interpretations of the Borges story tend to focus on how reading brings about difference through a Barthes-like emphasis on the true locus of writing as reading. Conversely, Ayash's focus interpolates Borges' fiction with the apparatus of the derivatives markets, the dynamic replication of the Black-Scholes-Merton model, and the derivative contract that implicitly relies on writing, hence bringing about a different emphasis on the act of writing of a previously existing text as a truly contingent act. Taking him up on his challenge, with each word that I wrote of The Blank Swan, chapter 4, Writing in the Market, there was simply nothing to say that any given word would necessarily follow the next. An artist not especially known for her feminist stance, Elaine Sturtevant, is particularly of interest here with her backdated artist book, Sturtevant, author of The Quixote, via a letter addressed to Borges in the introduction to 1970, around the time of her early practice of making works of other artists' works. As Patricia Lee notes, thereby pushing the codification of artists to specific signifiers in relation to the structures and systems of art. Sturtevant's works relied on their identification as significant works by well-known artists, reducing the artist's works to a sign, a brand, an easy meme producer, percolating myths of genius and so on, that could be seen to have more to do with sales amid the Brownian motion of the market than whatever other values might be claimed for art at any given time in history. Sturtevant's emphasis on the brutal truth of the work is that it is not a copy, is shared in Ayash's thinking when she claims the dynamics of the work is that it throws out representation. Ayash writes only through the writing, trading performance, and not through the realization of a theoretical stochastic process that is framed in representational thought, can the writer or trader of contingent claims exceed the saturated context and move to the next, i.e. she can trade. What this brings forth, in Ayash's terms, is the trading room and a performative capacity that is singular and non-reproducible, a capacity to write the future, seemingly shared across the blockchain, insofar as a technology that exceeds probability through the timestamp. I wouldn't want to be seen to get carried away with the potential of blockchain, as it is, after all, only a tool. But just as a pencil is only useful insofar as what you write with it, so is the potential of decentralization. As such, the most urgent and compelling aspect of this equation is the question of who gets to write the future in this new calculus, and how, even just as a thought experiment, it opens up the possibility of producing new ways of working, such as creating methods to produce verifiable news, for example, as well as many other applications. The timestamp almost seems to be the last axiom that's worth mentioning within the multitude of voices of a postmodern, post-colonial, post-absolute truth milieu that could build a difference engine that actually accounts for difference. And as such, it is important to develop strategies as to its use because, as we have seen of late, if you have no strategy, someone with a strategy will soon commandeer your tactics. And I'm just going to play. Have I got a minute?
Do you dream of the ability to link the link? Do you feel that there's a part of you that's missing? Link the link. Within cells, linked in, interlinked. Collective assessments of value, unstoppable equilibriums, multi-level analysis of nomadic media. Value is operationalized. We like, upload, comment or share. The ebbs and flows of a new economy. Data, update 23 annually. Terms of services accepted. Sample storage. Research consent 23andMe personal genome service biobank, the Google of personalized healthcare. Our goal is to connect you to the 23 paired volumes of your own genetic blueprint, bringing you personal insight into ancestry, genealogy, and inherited traits. Requesting permission to update Intel Series OS genetic blueprint for 8 Clarke.
And this is just a little taster. It's much better when you're standing in front of it, obviously. It's a rather terrible recording. But it was thinking about Alexa and Google as these voice recognition services that provide a very seamless incorporation of our activities with the Internet of Things. And this is only going to grow and gradually get more so. And this is really where the sort of interesting part is, I think, in the future, is this idea of what AI amounts to and how we just sort of start to think about representation through different signs that are evolving alongside that kind of research. But I'm going to stop now, so thank you very much for listening.